Welcome back, Perfect Peeps, to Perfect.dev. Today I have Nader Dabit with me. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Thank you for having me.
Nader is actually a senior developer advocate at AWS, which is amazing to have. How long have you been with AWS?
I joined in January of 2018, so a little over 2 years.
Very cool. Are you enjoying it so far?
I love it. Yeah, I really do.
I love your background, by the way. You must work from home often.
Yeah, this is my little studio at home, or actually, I wouldn't say at home. It's in my hometown, but I work remotely, and I have like an external studio. I do a lot of podcast, video recordings, live events and stuff. So we have a pretty decent setup in here.
Very cool. You're kind of like over AWS, the platform as a whole, as an advocate then, not specifically Amplify?
So I work for AWS Mobile. That's kind of my team. But within AWS Mobile, we have Amplify, AppSync, Device Farm. We have a few things. But the thing about Amplify is that it actually touches, a few dozen AWS services. So we kind of are expected to know not only the tooling around Amplify, but also, building stuff with the services and how all of that works.
Cool. So for the listeners that don't know, what is Amplify?
Yeah, it's kind of it's three different things, but really the idea is you use Amplify as a developer to build full stack cloud applications, full stack serverless applications. Full stack, it actually is the front and the back end. We provide the tooling, we provide everything to kind of work both on the client and on the server. And when I say the server, I mean kind of AWS resources and AWS services. The stuff that we're building on the client are things like SDKs for mobile and web. We also build CLIs. So we have the Amplify CLI. The CLI is kind of something you would use to build and create different services from your front-end environment. So you can kind of basically be a single developer and have a good understanding of just your front-end technology skill set, be that native iOS or be that React or Angular or whatever. And you can actually use your existing skill set using our tooling to kind of build these scalable applications that used to be only kind of open to very, very knowledgeable backend and AWS devs. But now we're kind of hoping, and a lot of the stuff that we're doing is actually breaking down that barrier and kind of enabling a lot of new developers to get into the ecosystem.
Yeah, very cool. Sorry, my video kind of cut out. I had to switch to my MacBook. So that's really why I probably started into Amplify as well, coming from a front-end development kind of background myself. And so it's been interesting. The new company that I work for, we have a large project that we started, and they're definitely within the AWS platform. And so I started down the road of Amplify because it was so similar somewhat to Firebase. And so it was kind of a good way to get started into that atmosphere, that world of AWS. So it's been really cool. It was a good launching point to start learning about all the other pieces to Amplify, which I think would help people out. I was a little more surprised, or a lot surprised by how much like CloudFormation and like S3 and Dynamo and like all those things you had to start to like kind of learn as you got into the product. But it's been fun. It's been a good experience. What do you like most about Amplify yourself?
So, I mean, the thing that I've kind of focused on with respects to a lot of my career and the progression of my career has been taking advantage of like really powerful abstractions, really focusing on developer velocity and being able to build stuff quickly. And that kind of brought me from early days when I was just writing JavaScript to then adopting stuff like jQuery mobile. And then I got into mobile development, but I didn't want to build, iOS and Android. I also wasn't an Android or iOS developer. So I started playing around with stuff like Ionic, and then React Native came around. I started getting really into that. And when you start becoming good at those abstractions, you start seeing the tremendous value and payoff there. And then other people start recognizing that when you start demonstrating that to other people. So with React Native, you could kind of write a single code base. And if you wrote the app properly, you could actually not see really any performance difference between a native iOS or a native Android app. So when you kind of are able to show that. And then you look at the costs associated with traditional native development. I was able to build a pretty robust and successful consulting business just around training other companies, even massive companies that had, all of the money in the world to throw at these problems. The combination of reduced costs, improved developer velocity, and efficiency just in general is a really great selling point. So like focusing on that type of stuff, I'm always looking out for what's in my opinion, like that next big thing or the wave that I could ride. And when I saw Amplify, I've always been really interested in cloud computing, but the barrier to entry has been really high. And for me, when I start looking into AWS, it's intimidating because just to learn one thing, you might spend weeks or months just getting good enough in it to actually use it. But in reality, you can't just use one thing. You actually have to put a few of these pieces together to make it all work. So when I saw the people and the vision behind Amplify and what they had already built, I was just sold automatically because it is the answer to that problem of like, how can a just normal or like beginner, even front-end developer, someone that doesn't know anything about back-end, how can they use their skill set and actually build the next like Netflix or something that will scale to that to where that is, but be able to kind of like, not have to invest 10 years learning how all that stuff works. And that's kind of like what our goal is. And that's kind of what we've seen some companies actually do even, which is really, really cool. But yeah, I think the selling point for me while I joined the team is kind of the vision and where we're headed.
Yeah, that's great points, especially on the React Native. I think even like Netflix until a couple of years ago, we're doing React Native instead of writing kind of the true native, if you will, not abstracted layer. So it's definitely fantastic. Great points on the AWS piece. Like scaling out is fantastic once you're in there because you're basically just running on top of AWS as a whole anyway. So it's pretty cool. So one of the other questions that we had for you, we are kind of hot on the AppSync side of the world. And for those who don't know AWS products, AppSync is actually a GraphQL based, I guess, API infrastructure, if that's the right way to say it.
Yeah. And
then AWS has another product called API Management, which is strictly like REST based, not with that GraphQL piece on it. Would you say most people in Amplify are kind of headed towards AppSync at this point, or where's that kind of lay at?
Yeah, definitely most people that are using Amplify are leveraging AppSync in some way. I think the cool thing about it is that you don't have to buy in completely to any of these things. You can kind of be building your application and have your GraphQL API, but you could also have a couple of REST APIs if you would like to. I think, if you are like a hardcore GraphQL enthusiast, you would say, put everything behind my GraphQL schema. And even if I have HTTP endpoints, we're going to map those to some GraphQL resolver. But not everyone wants to do that. And I don't think there's anything wrong with not doing that. In fact, we see companies in production not doing that. So if people are building businesses and companies that are making money and scaling, doing something, then obviously that it's working for them. And so I don't think there's any reason to kind of have to buy into any one thing. But like with AppSync, I think that for sure, a lot of people, almost all of the people using Amplify, if they have a data layer or using AppSync in some way, I think the advantage that it brings is that it kind of combines everything together between DynamoDB and an API endpoint, along with authorization and authentication. And that putting all those things together are not that easy for someone just getting started.
Yeah.
And then you just, out of the box, you get all of the stuff that GraphQL gives you anyway. And that's just kind of like extra, without having to do any extra work. So you get, the strong typing within your schema, and then you can kind of look at your schema and know exactly what's going on in your application. You also have all of the different access patterns that you can interact with from all of your front-end applications without having to rewrite new back-end APIs for each device or whenever you need a new endpoint. You don't actually have to write that. It's just there if you're using GraphQL.
Yeah.
So Yeah, I mean, definitely AppSync is becoming, more and more popular. And as we build better abstractions on top of it, I think it's going to become even more popular. To me, the biggest barrier to entry, and to me, the worst developer experience part of AppSync is the resolver layer. And when you have to write a custom resolver, you have to write in this language called velocity templating language, or VTL. Now, a lot of that VTL, you've probably run into that. A lot of the VTL is actually like created for you. You don't have to do it at all. But let's say you do need some custom business logic. The first time you jump in and start looking at VTL, it's very scary. Even though it's manageable, you can do anything in it. It's just essentially a programming language that you could kind of do all of the things that you could do. But if you've never used it before, the debugging isn't that good. So we're really working on actually building an optional JavaScript or Python or something like that option. So like you don't like if we fix that, like I'll be so happy. And that's something we are focusing on.
That's really exciting to hear that. Like living in a JavaScript world between Lambdas and our front end and everything, like we're doing mostly Angular, but if you're in React, whatever, to be able to go in a single language would be fantastic in that scenario. So the custom resolvers have been interesting. One of the things that we found pretty early on was, I wouldn't say a limitation, it's just more of a learning curve, was we have kind of some backend databases that were already there that we don't want modeled out within Amplify. So we don't want Amplify creating those tables. And so having to create like a custom resolver to an existing table seems like it's not that clearly cut in the documentation, if you will. So kind of learning how to do that with a custom resolver and things like that. It's definitely more challenging than I expected, but also once you got it, like the world's your oyster type.
Yeah, it just works.
Yeah. So I guess kind of in that same vein, and actually one other thing before I forget to mention it, the reason we went AppSync kind of right off the bat was being used to that Firebase layer where you're getting true like synchronization back and forth. AppSync, for Amplify AppSync, you actually get subscriptions out of that too. So you're getting those triggers when something updates through a resolver. That is one other piece to keep in mind, folks. If you are diving into that world, it has to be through a resolver that you actually get that subscription trigger. So if you're trying to do it off a existing database table and not through AppSync, it won't work. You'd have to do like some Dynamo streams or something like that. So just
DynamoDB knows nothing about the subscription itself. It's more like only if the operation is sent through AppSync. So like you mentioned, you can set up a trigger off of a stream and then do whatever you like at that point. And then there's also the idea of sending a subscription trigger or triggering a mutation that doesn't have any actual changes in your backend layer, just to trigger the subscription. So you could like create a mutation and actually hit no data source. Yeah. And all that does is just triggers that subscription. So a lot of people do opt for that in those situations.
Yeah, that's what we were actually just heading there. And I might ask you afterwards a little more in depth, but the piece about like having a lambda just kind of taking requests and seems a little heavy-handed just to trigger that no data data source in that resolver. So I might pick your brain afterwards.
Okay, sure.
So kind of in that same vein, something that we ran into, and this is a little bit wordy of a question, but what we've run into is that even though you kind of start to think you're direct modeled to Dynamo, you start running into issues where like you're running a scan, and if you're at a limit of like 10 items or 20 items or whatever, Dynamo actually passes that back, but then because you have authorization filtering within AppSync behind Cognito, you actually lose a lot of that data. So even within like that 20 that really came back in your request, you've removed out like 15 of them. All of a sudden it's like, wait a minute, where's my data going? Do you see a lot of issues coming about that, or is it more of a learning lesson where you should do a better job modeling out your data before you kind of get going with that?
Yeah, it's definitely not intuitive when you're first coming into it and when you run into that. So we're doing a couple things to mitigate that. First of all, we're increasing the initial limit from 10 to something like either 100 or 1,000. And actually, there's a conversation already going on with an initial pull request to kind of make that update. And therefore, when you're just starting off, you're probably not going to go over 1,000 items when you're testing it out. But that is only part of the problem. You're still scanning your entire database just for filtering out maybe a dozen or so items.
I kind of like having the 10 in there because we hit the realization like sooner that we were going to have.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I don't know.
I mean, well, we're doing another thing like around our documentation where we're going to provide, another like first class use case around this, and what it's going to be, and what I like to do anyway on every single database that I create through AppSync and with Amplify, and it's something we don't really talk about enough in the docs, but it's something we're going to probably do. So if you're working with DynamoDB in general, it's usually like known as like a good practice to have a consistent type field or something that's consistent across every item in your database that you can then use that as a partition key. So for instance, if you have a post table, or let's say a to-do table, then you might have a type name or a type of to-do, and every single item gets populated with that type. What you can then do is when you actually want to do a more efficient query operation, you have that base partition key to then add additional sort keys off of. So then you could say, okay, instead of doing that filter, after the scan, instead let's just do a real query, and we'll have that partition key to start with, and then we can do a sort key off of any other column in the entire database. Yeah. And that way it's already ready to go, and it's really easy to start adding additional data access patterns.
Yeah, I think we finally, just this morning, actually came to the realization we were probably modeling things out too much like a MySQL type of database where columns and rows and things mattered so much. And we kind of started running into that same issue. So we took and did one single column for a category, which
there you go.
essentially started to become our old table names. And now we have this massive single table, or at least two tables probably we'll end up with. And then we have global secondary indexes that do like all of the things that we need to do at this point. So that's a huge like learning curve. And I think it would be useful. Maybe I'll even throw a lesson up, or we could do something where we can get it onto Amplify's website to just talk through that data modeling piece. I think it's probably more so belongs in the DynamoDB world to get through, but as a front-end developer where you don't have probably that expertise on the back-end database side of things, it's really important to start to explain like this is still essentially, I don't know if you call it object type database or a NoSQL database.
Yeah.
Stop thinking about it in this column row type of setup.
Right. I mean, I think that when you start digging into DynamoDB, at least for me at first, like a year or two ago, I think the material that the community is creating now is actually getting better. But when I first started looking at it, it was very, very confusing for me. And I think a lot of it had to do with, I'm not going to say it's not good documentation, but I think it's documentation geared towards people that already kind of understand that space a little bit. But when you actually break down exactly, if you can explain it in a way that actually is easier for people like me, coming into this new to understand, the actual idea of how to create a key and then query on that isn't that complex. Right. But I think the way that they talk about it was very confusing to me. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there also just to kind of re-explain the things that are already available, but in an easier to digest way.
I feel like there's a good opportunity there for like some beginner, like coming from front end development to like understanding Dynamo, because we went back now, which it's been 2-3 months since we've been on this project, and we look at the docs and it's like, oh yeah, it's all in here. But when we first read it, like trying to understand like the primary key, sorted key, you're only allowed this, and it's like, oh, like we're used to dealing with like Firestore, like You just throw it all in and then make an index later. Don't worry about it.
Right. And what you mentioned something interesting earlier, though, that you were basically saying you have a column that you're basically doing what you would have done in the past, like give it a table name. And there's some stuff that I've been working on around ideas around a new API for DynamoDB for front-end developers. That's something like Firebase, but without GraphQL. And the idea was use a single table and have a collection name partition key. And then you can just like query on that collection name and then add additional indexes on it. And that way you can like just dump everything into that column.
That's exactly it. So it would make a front-end developer's life a lot easier, I think. But who knows?
That's cool. It's interesting to hear this feedback.
Yeah. So yeah, we were starting to migrate to 4.18. I don't know if you've done the same. And one of the hiccups we keep running into is we cannot get TypeScript like the mapping and lambdas to work. We've tried everything. So we're web packing up essentially our lambda using TypeScript. And we can't get, so it used to be, I'm going to forget the name now, Amplify init. No, not init function, invoke. It used to be Amplify invoke function or function invoke. And we were getting by like debugging and stuff like that. Have you tried it on 4.18 within lambdas for the debug side of it?
No, but this is something we obviously need to look into. Is it like a bug, essentially, you think?
I honestly don't know. I've tried it a million like different variations and my setup on VSCode. And there was a change where in 4.17, it used to do, you would say invoke and then you would pick like your handler and everything. And at least it would kick into the local terminal and debug it. But I can't in 4.18. So yeah, if you have time at some point, maybe we could dive into that offline as well.
We released, I think, 4.19 last night. I don't expect that I know whether or not this was fixed or not, but check that out. And if it's not fixed, or if you still have questions about it, I would open up a ticket under the CLI issues and we can take a look.
Yeah, it'd be interesting. That's probably one interesting, maybe not limitation, but it's something that I've been struggling with. Again, like from the Firebase world, they have kind of localized emulators. I don't know if you guys usually use like the SAM tool for that emulation or how you're usually getting through that.
For the local mocking?
Yeah, for local mocking of lambdas.
I'm actually not sure what they're using under the hood.
Okay. Yeah, I'd be curious like how a normal, whatever that means, how front-end developers are kind of testing and debugging their lambdas that they're triggering through Amplify. That's something that we've had a decent struggle with. So a lot of times it's crazy console logging out in Amplify itself or out in AWS once it's deployed and just trying to pick through the code at that point.
Yeah. That's always honestly been the thing with serverless functions to me is the testing and stuff like that.
Yeah, cool. Yeah,
especially in like when you deploy a new update, it just takes a while for the change to be updated. It's not instant like local, and yeah, that's something that has always been a pain point. We've improved it, but it still has a lot of work to go, I think.
Yeah, it'd just be neat to be able to emulate that more locally, I guess. So I'll keep picking around and see what I can find. So images are kind of always in the forefront of front-end development. We always have to manage it somehow. I know I use a lot of Cloudinary type of tools and stuff like that. Is Cloudfront still kind of the best solution in the AWS? And is there a good methodology with I think it's called Media Convert, for getting different size images as well?
Yeah. So first of all, you mentioned Cloudinary, right? So to me, like if you need any of that really interesting, like really robust functionality, then I would actually just use something like Cloudinary. And I know I work for AWS, but I'm always quick to tell someone to use something if I think it does a job better. And until we have something like that, if you need something to easily define Like, let's say you need an image that's this size by this size. You could write all of that code and kind of like automatically make those updates from a Lambda trigger and then serve it from CloudFront. Yeah, you could do all that. But if you need something just quick and easy, like to me, Cloudinary has such a great API, and it's so easy to get up and running with. I would love if we built something like that serves a similar use case, but we don't have anything right now. So I think it just depends on the use case. I would say either reach for Cloudinary if you don't want to build something like that yourself. If not, I would create, a Lambda trigger off of S3 and define all the different images sizes that you need for each one. Make all of those updates for every upload, and then serve that from CloudFront.
Okay, and CloudFront's pretty much the best way to go with the CDN for fronting that then?
I think so.
We did have a kind of an interesting question that came up around pricing on CloudFront. The only thing I could find as far as like limiting CloudFront access is to set, or I think you can request like a pricing tier. So it only prices for North America and Europe was an option. Is that like, there's basically no way to say CloudFront at the edge, don't serve it in China type of thing?
I'm not an expert in CloudFront, and I don't know the answer to that question, to be honest. So I would have to look into it.
Cool. So something that keeps coming up, the rest of the product team that we work with actually uses Terraform to keep everything kind of in sync for the infrastructure side of things. Jumping off into Amplify, and for those who don't know, CloudFormation is basically what's running underneath of, if that's the right word, Amplify. So anytime you're creating APIs or creating databases and things like that, your stacks are getting generated within CloudFormation to create that tooling. Do you find that the benefits to all of the like front end pieces that connect you, or the mobile, however you want to say it, for Amplify, it's worthy enough to keep that separated? Or do you find teams kind of do like a little bit of half and half, where like if you have deep infrastructure stuff, leave that in a separate project, use Terraform or CloudFormation or serverless framework directly, and then for your front end stuff, if you have certain tables or things, serve that on this side? Is that?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and that comes up a lot. And I think that it's worth stepping back and like looking at the two types of developers or customers that use Amplify. One is the developer that only uses the client SDKs, and they then are deploying their AWS infrastructure on Terraform or serverless framework, or they've written some stuff in the console or even CloudFormation or whatever. And they're only worried about interacting with the APIs, and they think that Amplify offers the best, easiest user experience and ways to kind of call, their Lambda, their API gateway or AppSync endpoints and all that stuff, S3. So there's that developer. And then there's the developer that buys into like the full end-to-end solution, the CLI, which creates CloudFormation, which is in a similar space as like serverless framework and all these other things. So like, let's say that you're not one of these developers that already has their infrastructure deployed, and you're kind of investigating the different options between serverless framework and Terraform and Amplify CLI. I think that, the Amplify CLI was actually just released in 2018, I believe mid 2018. So it's less than 2 years old. When you look at something like Terraform released in 2014, serverless framework, I don't remember when that was released. Mm-hmm. The feature parity just isn't there yet with Amplify CLI. So we don't support everything that serverless framework does. We don't support all the stuff that CloudFormation does. You can escape out of Amplify with CloudFormation though, so you can write your own CloudFormation for anything that we don't support yet. But it's not like a first-class citizen. Yeah. So like I typically would recommend like look at the feature set that we provide and look at the trade-offs between developer velocity versus like whatever else you're going to get out of some other tool, and then just make that decision. So a lot of times people will start with Amplify, and then they'll get to a point where they realize it's slowing them down, because if they need to add a lot of custom stuff, it starts becoming not as easy as they would have liked. Then they kind of eject. But at that point, their application is already been proven to work and they're happy with where it is, and they can now, okay, like we've used Amplify for that DX and that developer velocity. Now we want to take it to the next level, so we're going to eject and continue writing additional features. Some people stick with Amplify and like they are able to do everything they want and they stick with it. Other people evaluate everything and they decide to start with serverless framework or whatever, and then only use the front end client SDKs. So I think it just depends. And we're, our end goal is to make it to where you never have to ever leave Amplify CLI ecosystem. We want to write all that CloudFormation and do everything from the CLI, and then let you customize it. But I think we still have some ways to go before we're there.
Yeah, no, that's a very honest answer, and it's a good answer too, because I think every piece of that we've kind of hidden. Like we have days where we're like, maybe we should jump out, but it's like, it provides all these things that are really nice for our developer experience. Maybe we should stay in. And so we're constantly always evaluating, and just it would be nice to have like a model where we could fully eject, I guess, from Amplify easily to get to it. But I've kind of like sat there and went pros and cons through the whole list to look at what it would take. I don't think it would be that bad, honestly, to get through it. It just, the niceties when we have to change a model and it updates our API and boom, we're done. It always outweighs kind of the other factors, and it still provides infrastructure as code realistically, because you have the CloudFormation piece kind of baked into it for what we need. So we're kind of covered there. That's always been like, you have to be infrastructure as code is number one, first class citizen type of setup. And once we explain, like, we still are doing that, our infrastructure folks, they calm down a little bit and they're a little happier about it. So it's kind of cool to hear you have customers in all different methodologies using that. And 100%, I'd agree, like with that DX side of things. It's great.
And like one of the things that I'm always hammering on, and a lot of other people on my team, thankfully, also believe in this like a lot, is providing the most easy to use and really fully like supported escape hatches. And we want to like have those escape hatches for the things that we don't support, and we also want to make those easy to use. So right now, like we're currently working on some modifications and new things that we're building into Amplify CLI to make that even better than it already is, and make it easier. So like it's something we're completely aware of and focusing on.
So I was gonna ask, kind of what is next for Amplify? We have the video plugin coming out. I was trying to bring it up here. Let's see if I can throw it on the screen. This is weird having my camera dying me. I don't like it. Okay. So for folks who haven't seen, here's the AWS Amplify window. That is ginormous. I got a new widescreen. This thing.
That's nice.
That's cool. So this is the main page that you can get to, and then the new docs are out there. I think they'll show up. Maybe. Yeah, so this is the new doc page, which is excellent. The piece that I wanted to show everyone is, I didn't realize this till not that long ago, but there is AWS labs for different items. So I definitely wanted to, that was my one shout out to make sure people are able to check that out for Amplify. I threw out the Amplify video piece, a little tutorial on coding cat dev, but I was curious, are there other items that are coming up that people should know about and that you want to tell people about that you're working on?
So I think if you look through some of the GitHub issues and the CLI repo and the JavaScript repo and any of the native repos, you'll see RFCs. So you'll be able to kind of see actually exactly the things that we're considering doing out in the open. There's always a couple of things that we're kind of working on, like I would say behind closed doors, that are going to be like really innovative new additions. But most of the work that we do is directly driven by feedback from people that are already using it. So we use the GitHub RFCs to kind of have those discussions and make sure we get all the input from everyone. So if you want to know kind of like where we're headed, you'll see a lot of that there. You'll also see a few things that happen by the end of the year that were not discussed because they're, very big deals, like innovative stuff that we're really excited about. Look out for the Flutter SDK. That's being worked on. That's out in the open. That's not like a secret or anything. Yeah. So we have that coming. We're excited about that. As we start to take on all of the breadth of developers that we've kind of onboarded over the last year, we're hitting, we're starting to hit all of these edge cases, because when you scale up, you get all these new people in, and they're trying all these new things, and they come up with things that we they hit all these roadblocks that we probably either haven't accounted for, or we didn't put them as a priority. So like all these new people trying out Amplify and using it are bringing all of this amazing feedback, and we're kind of really always reevaluating all that stuff, and we're using all of that information to kind of decide what to do next and prioritize. So everything's customer driven. Everything is driven by the developers. So if you want to be part of that conversation, just jump into the GitHub issues and look around, and you'll see some stuff happening in there.
Very cool. Yeah, that's a great place to go out to. So we always do what we call a Purrfect Picks. I'm going to throw mine up because I know you probably need a minute to kind of pick yours. Is there anything you want to share with someone? I can throw it up on the screen and we can take a look at it. My pick for today is actually the AWS Amplify Unicorn Flicks. So I had started putting a couple of issues out when I was going through the videos, because I was struggling to get through how to do the video course. And actually they said, why don't you just check the repo for the Unicorn Flicks? I'm like, didn't even know that was there. That's pretty sweet. So that is my pick for this podcast. Do you have anything from your side?
Yeah, I mean, I have a few different things. The first I guess I can plug is we brought we had a new person join our team yesterday. His name is Kilo Loco on social media, on YouTube and on Twitter. His name is actually Kyle Lee, but he has a really great YouTube channel, and he actually has created a couple of videos around his experience in the industry over the last few years. And he was actually working at Bird just a month ago, and he got laid off. And he did this video. I got laid off. I got like over 100,000 views. Wow. And his YouTube channel is great. And he just joined our team, and we're excited to have him. And you'll see some really great mobile stuff. So he's going to do a lot of native iOS and Android, but he's also probably going to do Flutter and React Native stuff a little bit.
I'm super excited you guys are getting into Flutter.
And then the other thing is, I have two books that I just recently finished. One is the autobiography of Malcolm X, probably the best book that I've read in the last couple of years. And then the other is a book called Flash Boys. And Flash Boys is about high frequency trading and the software that runs it. And both of those were probably a couple of my favorite books. I've actually read Flash Boys like a couple of years ago, but I just reread it. And I think it's such a really fascinating story about how Wall Street and how high frequency stock trading works.
Very cool. I'll have to throw them out in the description. Awesome. Well, I super appreciate you coming on and talking about Amplify. I'd love to have you back on again as we kind of dive into more subjects on AWS and Amplify, if we can pull you back in.
I'd love to do it. Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure. I love talking about this stuff.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Take care, Nader.
See ya.
Thanks again for watching Purrfect.dev. We also host a podcast on Purrfect.dev. This feeds out to iTunes, Breaker, Google Podcasts, Overcast.fm, Pocket Casts, Radio Public, Spotify, and Stitcher. We hope to see you next time. Thanks for watching Purrfect.dev.